knowledge of apologetics, giving answers, you feel much more confident in your conversations with people. The intimidation begins to dwindle, and you are more able then and more confidently to present yourself. And that's one of the goals of my seminars. As far as a niche, I've identified myself within the creation science movement, fitting the niche of organizing material. A lot of material, what I present, is nothing new. I'm not engaged in new or current research myself, but I collect the information, look at what's been found, put it together, organize it, and then train people. And that is my goal. So to see hands raised out here is so rewarding to me, because that's my goal. I'm not here to tickle ears and just make you feel good and go, wow. Like we had in high school, our chemistry professor, he would give us ooh-ah experiences in chemistry. But I'll tell you what, when I got into college, that did me no good whatsoever. So I'm glad to see that this is really benefiting you, and feel like that you've been equipped in some way to take this and have an improved and better witness, and certainly then also your own personal understanding as well. Well, let's see, we're starting out with the origin of life this evening, and this is an exciting topic. And this gets into the area that I have my greatest specialty, and that is microbiology. Because here we're talking about single-celled organisms, and that's where I got my master's in single-celled organisms, and then I got my doctorate in single-celled organisms. So I love these critters. I like talking about them. I'm really curious and interested in what they can do. There's really, when you just narrow it all down to what can a single cell do anyway, it's just a chemical factory wrapped up in a membrane. That's all it is. And to really understand a cell, then you need to understand your biochemistry and understand your metabolism, which is the same thing. It's just applied biochemistry in the cell. So you learn about your DNA and your RNA synthesis and your protein synthesis, and then where all those proteins and enzymes end up in the cell to cause the chemistry to take place. I mean, it's amazing. Just to think about the genes and the particular enzymes that are made. If an organism lacks an enzyme, then you do not have that chemical pathway, which might make the difference between being able to see green or not see green in your eye. It's phenomenal when you think about it. Just how well designed these things are. And as a result of that, controlling disease, which was my specialty, immunology and infectious diseases, what that does is when you understand all the pathways, now you have multiple sites to attack. From the membrane to any particular enzyme. Let's say you got 100 enzymes that are involved in the metabolic cycle of a cell. You can attack any one of those 100 points. So the knowledge that we have of cell chemistry is real important to be able to cope with that. All right, let's talk about the origin of life then. And before we do, we ought to do a brief review last night. 2 nights ago we talked about design, didn't we? And the evidence that things did not occur by accident, but the evidence overwhelmingly screams at us, hey, there's a designer out there. Now last night we ended up talking about the laws of thermodynamics, which deals with what subject?
Energy.
Yes, energy, ultimately. And what kind of energy were we talking about?
What kind? Well, it can't be created or...
Yes, but what kind?
It can't be
It's really not a trick question. It'll sound like a trick question, but it's an important question. Everything, that's right. Everything is energy. If you can measure it in energy, see, it was so easy. Well, it was a trick question because it was so easy and obvious. But you see, energy goes beyond heat and light and sound. It includes matter of all different sorts. If you can see it, taste it, touch it, weigh it, measure it in any way, it is a form of energy. And the laws of thermodynamics say, first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot create itself by natural means. All right, you won't find that in the textbooks, but I throw it in there because otherwise you will inevitably have some philosopher come to you if you're talking to them. Well, if the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot create itself, then God can't create it. Because it can't create, well, no, it doesn't apply. Why? Because we're dealing with a natural law. And the natural laws do not apply to the supernatural. And so that was the question that one of the boys here was asking about. What about the creation of God? Who created God? Well, we know that the laws of thermodynamics are physical, natural laws that apply, derive from the natural world, and apply to the natural world, the physical, not the supernatural. And then the rebuttal, a rebuttal that the evolutionists may come up with is, well, energy didn't have to create itself because it's always been here. Now what do you say?
Where did it come from?
All right, well, they said it's always been here. Didn't have to come from anywhere.
Well, from what starting point? I mean,
Yeah.
everything
Had to
has to
start
have a
somewhere.
starting point.
What had to start from somewhere? Well, it's always been here. It has no starting point because it's always been here.
But it runs down. After it runs down.
Okay, now we're dealing with organization, not existence. You see, now the first law of thermodynamics deals with the existence of energy, but the second law of thermodynamics deals with the organization of energy. And so the organization has an end point, which means the beginning point of organization, not the beginning point of its existence. Because we're addressing the rebuttal that, well, energy's always been here, it didn't have to create itself. Therefore, the first law of thermodynamics is irrelevant to the issue. All right, so then we go to the second law of thermodynamics and say, but the second law of thermodynamics says energy cannot organize itself by natural means in a closed system. You see, and a closed system would be the universe. Now, some will argue, well, it's an open system, and this universe is spawning new universes, and those have multiple universes, and there's just an ongoing infinite number of universes. But there's a problem with that too. And the reason for that is a multiple universe scenario is nothing more than imagination, wild imagination. Now, here's how you deal with explanations like that. You say, what is the evidence that that's the case? That's right, there is no evidence. You see, you just have to press the point. Show me the evidence. Show me where the evidence supports the idea that there are multiple universes. We don't even know if we've actually seen the edges or the ends of our own universe, much less more universes popping into existence. This is pure imagination. So when you come across, in fact, you can use this as just part of a discussion tactic. If someone's making a claim or gives you an explanation, well, this is how it happened or why it happened, just ask them, how do you know that? Well, it's just obvious, isn't it? Well, not to me. Please explain it and show me the evidence. And see, they won't be able to give it to you. It's like a particle physicist that I may have told you the story about already. When I confronted him, because he had prepped a philosopher who was in debating with me, found out they had dinner the night before, and he was coaching them on the science because they knew. Here I was a scientist and he was a philosopher, and so how was that debate going to be handled? And so he was coaching them, and he coached them to say that the first law of thermodynamics doesn't say that something can't come from nothing, but in fact something has been shown to come from nothing. And so that's what the guy that I was debating actually said in the debate. He said, why, this has actually been demonstrated that something can come out of nothing. Well, I was sitting over here and I was looking out at the crowd, wondered, boy, the students were going, wow, I haven't heard that one before. I hadn't heard that one before. Anyway, then I followed through a couple days later, and I finally got him to tell me who his reference was. Where did you hear this? I want to find out where this evidence is. Well, it turns out it was a particle physicist. I called that guy up, and I asked him, so-and-so is representing you as his source, that something can come from nothing. And he's saying, oh yeah, that happened years ago. Back in the 1930s, that's where that experiment came from. In fact, it's been repeated in the 1960s as well. I said, really, what experiment is that? And he told me that experiment was the vacuum chamber. And I said, well, I'm familiar with that experiment. That had nothing to do with something coming out of nothing. That was demonstrating that one form of energy can convert into another form. And I still hear it on the phone. Yeah, that's right. I'm telling you, these guys are bald-faced liars. Isn't that what the Bible says? All men are liars. And they have no morality. They have no God to answer to. They don't care they don't care one bit about whether they lie to you or not, as long as they are one-upping you, winning the debate by any means. They will lie to you. That was a lie. If I had not known about that experiment, he would have allowed me, just like he had the philosophy professor and everybody else he talks to, thinking, oh, well, this is a particle physicist. Who better than he would know that something comes from nothing? That's not right. That's just not right. It makes me mad to think about what goes on in this field. But just because they're scientists does not mean that they're in the quest for truth. They are in a quest for being right, having fame, making money, and saying things to convince people to believe like them, regardless of what it takes. All right. Now, that brings us to the what we concluded with two arguments. First law of thermodynamics and second law of thermodynamics was that based on the laws of science, empirical, that natural physical word there, empirical evidence demonstrates and shows that energy cannot create nor organize itself by natural means. If it can't happen naturally, then it's logical to conclude that it must have happened supernaturally. That's right, it must have happened supernaturally. There's nothing unscientific about that at all. In fact, I like to point out that a creation scientist, among our peers as scientists, creation scientists are more open-minded and more susceptible to, or I shouldn't use the word susceptible, they are more likely to find truth rather than the naturalists among the scientists. And the reason why they are more likely to find truth is because they are open to allow the evidence to lead them wherever it may lead, supernatural or natural. You see, believing in a creation science model doesn't mean you have to have everything is attributed to a supernatural. Having said that, this is an important point to understand, and something that you hear evolutionists criticize creationists about quite a bit. They say, oh, we found a new species in the Amazon. God must, according to the creation model, God must have brought this new species into existence. They find a new lizard in a cave. Oh, God. Snicker, snicker. Well, hey, all that means in a creation science model, all that means is that we haven't found that organism before. Mm-hmm. That's what that means. And if the lizard loses its eyesight, well, that fits perfectly in the creation science model, because you can imagine that if there's no eyesight needed in the cave, that mutant gene for blind lizards, you could lose the sight gene. That's no big deal. You see, that's a natural explanation. That fits perfectly well in the creation science model. But you see, the supernatural model can also take the first and second laws of thermodynamics and say, well, because the laws say it can't have come about existing and organizing itself by natural means, therefore supernatural, To the naturalists, they say, that can't happen. It had to happen naturally. But the laws of science says it can't happen naturally. It happened anyway. We just don't know how it happened in contradiction to the laws. But a scientific law a credible scientific explanation must not contradict the laws that are known today. Not what they hope to find tomorrow. You see, that is wishful thinking. That's not science. And by forcing a natural conclusion, regardless of its contradiction to natural laws and scientific laws, means that it exposes the incredible bias that's built into naturalism today in our scientific communities. So you see, that's why I can say that a creation scientist is much more open-minded and more likely to give a more accurate and plausible explanation for how things came to be and were organized rather than a naturalist. So, having said that, let's look at the origin of life, because now that we've concluded that the laws of science lead to the most logical conclusion that, well, everything must have been created and organized by supernatural means, then it's reasonable to propose that the origin of life may be supernaturally there may be a supernatural origin or cause for the origin of life as well. Now what this means is, where did the first cell come from? Alright? We're not dealing with speciation where there's already life and already cells. We're talking about lifeless molecules accumulating and pulling themselves together to organize into a living, functional, reproducing cell. Now, where did that come from? That's what we're talking about. Here's the empirical evidence we're going to look at.
What is that little critter up there?
That is probably a euglena. It's called a euglena. I'm not for sure, but it's showing euglenoid movement. It's sort of like a worm. It's not an amoeba. Amoebas have pseudopods, but it also has cilia on there. Cilia are these tiny little finger-like hairy projections off the cell surface. So it's not a paramecium, because paramecium doesn't have that shape-shifting function to it. So it could very well be a euglenoid. All right. Now with the and I didn't put that picture up there because it was animated. I thought, oh, that's cool. So that's why I put it up there. So anyway, here's the empirical evidence. We're going to look at the first two. I'm not going to get into the laboratory research, and unless you want to, we can talk about the biochemistry and the metabolic pathways. See, I didn't think so. Okay. All right. The law of biogenesis and the law of probabilities. This is all you're going to have to know. You can nail this one yourself. We're trying to equip you to be able to take this information to someone else. So this is the empirical. Empirical means what?
Physical.
The physical or the natural. Very good. All right, so here we start out with the law of biogenesis. Now this is a very, very important reference. Helena Curtis, Biology, 2nd edition. Publisher is Worth, page 90. And let me tell you why this is so important. The law of biogenesis is recorded in this book, and it's recorded in many other books, but this is the book we used at the University of Arkansas, and that I was using in the labs to teach students. Where a cell exists, there must have been a pre-existing cell, just as the animal arises only from an animal, and the plant only from that. You think, now, is that in a biology textbook? You wouldn't see that today. Now here's one of the reasons why you won't see it in the textbooks today. I was doing a lecture called Evolution Dilemma at the University of Arkansas, and in the audience we had a zoology professor. We had several of her students. We had some other faculty sitting there as well, and they had come to hear about the evolution dilemma. Well, while I was lecturing, I started out, and I like to define words before I begin, especially in this type of lecture, because I'm saying now there's different meanings of the word evolution. There is the word that evolution in Webster's dictionary, number 1. You'll notice that evolution simply means change. So the automobile has evolved from the Model T up to where we are today. We have architecture has evolved. Societies have evolved, and the way we approach things has evolved. So it simply means change. Then there's a second definition of evolution, and that is that evolution means the descent with modification. It's called the general theory of evolution. Descent with modification. That is, organisms descend, or they are descendants of previous ancestors, with modifications occurring to them. So they're not the same as their ancestors. They have evolved into different things. So beginning with the simple cell, the single cell, all living forms of organisms, plants, animals, fungus, protozoans, and protista and monera, they all came from a single ancestor, okay, ultimately. Now, this is what is meant by the general theory of evolution. But there's a third definition of evolution as well. As Theodosius Dobzhansky would say, sitting in one film we used to show, all scientists accept the fact of evolution from the Big Bang up to the existence and appearance of mankind. What do you mean? From the Big Bang to humanity? You see, evolution is all-encompassing. That's a broader definition of the general theory of evolution, shortened to evolution. So when you're talking about evolution, which evolution are you talking about? Now, if you were to go on the street and interview anyone, survey them, and say, what is evolution? They would tell you what? What do you suppose they would say to you?
Monkeys turn.
What?
Monkeys turning into
Yeah,
man.
that's right. Monkeys turning into man. Now, that's what people would say. Isn't that funny? Yet, evolutionists will say, that's not what we teach. Well, what they mean is, they don't come from monkeys. We come from the great ape. No, we don't come from the great ape. We come from a common ancestor from which the great apes and humanity have come from, Australopithecus. Yes, what would you say evolution is? Yeah, which one? That's right. That's a very good question to ask someone who says, well, evolution is just change. Well, what change are we talking about? Which evolution? Now, I was doing this lecture, I defined the term evolution. I said, when I'm talking about evolution, I'm using the second definition. And as I'm talking about evolution throughout the lecture, Dr. Kramer was sitting there, that's not evolution, that's not evolution. And then she kept saying that, and then she was saying that out loud, basically heckling. And finally, I would say, now this is what evolution is. Remember, I am using the second definition of evolution. I'm not using the first. Now see, when I had Dr. Gish coming up in 1981 to the University of Arkansas, it turns out that when he came up, he said, I want Dr. Kramer. I want to debate him. Why is that? Well, because when he was down in Hot Springs, Arkansas, after he left town, she had a lot to say in the newspaper about him. So he said, I want her on stage with me. I'll debate her. And when I went to her and I said, Dr. Gish asked for you. He wants to debate you. She said, that's unethical. Debates are unethical. Well, it's not unethical to attack someone behind their back when they can't defend themselves. So she wasn't going to do it. But then I found out more to it. The faculty urged her, do not do that. You will lose. He's such a great debater. He's so polished. You'll be defeated. So anyway, that was more of the story. But having said that, during setting up trying to set up that debate, we were talking about evolution, and she says, well, don't you believe that things change? I said, of course I do. She says, that's all evolution is. I said, no, Dr. Kramer, you know that's not the case. You know that we're talking about the general theory of evolution. No. No, evolution is simply a lot of little changes. I mean, just little changes that take place. Dr. Evolution, we're talking from the Big Bang all the way up to man. At the very least, we're talking about from a single cell to all living form. No. We're just talking about change. Oh man, that is so deceptive. Now, That's what she was doing in the lecture. No. What he's talking about, this is not evolution. And finally, a student that was over here in this corner of the audience, he stood up and said, how many here have been taught that evolution involves man coming from Australopithecus or something like that? And everyone except Kramer and her students and other faculty, and they're all raising their hands. And she's sitting there the whole time. And then there was a girl in the third row here, and she stands up and turns around and says, well, Dr. Kramer, I was there. That's what I was taught. No, she wasn't going to budge. So then, at another lecture, a few years later, she was there, and I was ready for her, and she came and was doing the same thing. I said, well, Dr. Kramer, you were sitting on the committee that approved this book.
Interesting.
Here's why I have this book up on screen. That book does not exist anymore at the University of Arkansas. Not only that was the last semester it was ever seen on campus, they removed it from the library bookshelves as well.
Oh.
Wow.
You think you live, it makes you feel like you live in the USSR. The rewriting of not only history but science. The law about, that's why I have this reference on here for you, so that you can reference it. It is in the Library of Congress because they record all literature that's been published and been copyrighted. So you can go and find this, and there's other places too. But now evolutionists are trying to redefine what law of biogenesis means, and they're trying to associate with Ernst Haeckel's falsified information about embryo comparisons. That's not biogenesis at all.
That's not the first book that's been subject to political
You're absolutely right.
discrimination.
That's right.
I mean, it's from the White House on down. They use what science they think fits their political agenda, and everything else is tossed.
That's right. Censored, scratched out. You see, I'm making a big deal here because this law, though it may disappear and not be taught anymore, it's not because the science has shown that it's wrong.
Yeah.
But rather what's going on is it's been censored.
Yeah.
That's why you may not see it. And then replacing it with Ernst Haeckel, yeah. That's, see, there is a confusion going on now. All right, let's look at this next one. Now, here's what the law of biogenesis says. All cells must come from pre-existing cells. Well, basically what it says is life does not come from lifeless molecules by natural means. Molecules just don't pull themselves together. Now, Louis Pasteur came up with this experiment when he was debating the spontaneous generation crowd in his day. The evolutionists might rebut this and say, yeah, but that was dealing with spontaneous generation. We don't deal with that today. Well, we have the evolutionists are using a more sophisticated, more gradual and slower process of spontaneous generation. But it's still lifeless molecules coming into life, into the form of life. This swan-necked flask that Louis Pasteur has used, I've never seen the original, but it's what I've read about is it's still at the Louis Pasteur Institute in France, and it still has nothing growing in it. Now, if all cells come from pre-existing cells, living cells, then we have to ask the question, where did the first cell come from then? This is a real puzzle. This is a real big challenge. Cells cannot create themselves by natural means from lifeless molecules. So it's only logical to conclude if it didn't happen naturally, then it must have happened supernaturally. I mean, we're using science, we're using empirical evidence. We have a law of science, the law of biogenesis, that says it can't happen any other way, right? So is it not logical to say, okay, well then supernatural? Of course, the evolutionist is going to say, well, all you're saying is, I don't know how it happened, therefore God. That is called God of the Gaps argument. But again, as with the laws of thermodynamics, this is not God of the gap argument. Here's why. God of the gap argument is we don't have a clue or an understanding in any way why this should occur, therefore we attribute it to God, the supernatural. But this law says it can't happen. See, this is based on what we do know. It says it can't happen by natural means. So then we're led by that evidence to conclude the supernatural.
So what of the theory that life could have been transported here on an asteroid or a meteor?
Oh, good question. Now, see, that's what some evolutionists do. In fact, Richard Dawkins is even open to that idea. What did you say, Walter?
It still doesn't, I mean, it's still got to come from somewhere.
All right, where did it start
Unless
back
the laws
there?
change off planet Earth, and we don't have any evidence of that.
Okay, see, this is a good point. And this is what happened. Okay, it comes from another planet. But the physical world, we're applying the same. Now, there's two things that Walter's mentioned here. Let me point this out. Number one, we're just extending this back, and it can go ad infinitum. Okay, all the way back and keep. Okay, where did that first life come from? Oh, it came from this planet. Okay, where did that life? And you can keep following it and chasing it, and somewhere along the line it had a beginning. So all we're doing is postponing it. Pushing it back, but it's still law of biogenesis. Now, the second issue that's brought up, unless the laws don't apply to the other planets like they do on planet Earth. But see, our laws, as we're studying the universe, when we study the sun, we're studying other solar systems, and we're taking measurements of galaxies, we're looking for life in outer space. What are we using? The same scientific physical laws that we use here on planet Earth to explain our universe. There is no reason, in fact, there's reason not to believe that the laws are any different anywhere in our universe. There is no scientific basis to think that there's different laws somewhere else. We don't operate that way, but everything is uniform. So those are two issues there, and that's a good point to raise because it helps us draw this together and draw that knot tighter and tighter. We are right. We've got the science on our side.
And so if we don't know the boundaries of our universe, if we don't know we've seen the edge of known space, doesn't that bring up the cause for infinite improbability?
No, it doesn't. Here's why. There is the idea that there are multiple universes, spawning multiple universes. But what is the actual evidence that such a thing has taken place? We do know that we have this universe. We do know that we can, the way we've measured it, it is thought to be about 18 billion light years in diameter to measure. So the next question then is, where does the evidence come from that it is multiplying or spawning new universes? There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Here's where the idea of multiple universes came from. And it's based on probabilities. It's really rooted in the fine-tuned problem, which has come to be known as the anthropomorphic or the anthropological constant. How do we explain life in the universe? It's so fine-tuned, and life is so delicate, and there's such a myriad of possible combinations that could exist for the forces of strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and so on. So how do we explain that this actually came into being? Well, the probabilities are so astronomical, it's impossible that we should exist unless maybe there was multiple universes. So see, what has happened is the origin of the proposal that there are multiple, ad infinitum, multiple universes is because we should not exist unless there was probability-defying numbers of universes. Absolutely no evidence whatsoever. None whatsoever. That's why I say that's pure speculation and imagination without any evidence whatsoever. So, and I like to go back to, if we're going to have a credible scientific explanation and modeling for our world, we have to rely on what we know today. Now, there's nothing wrong with striving for and looking for evidence of multiple universes or trying to break the first law of thermodynamics. That's not unscientific. But you can't you can't make interpretations and build models and call it credible on what you hope to find later on. That's not credible. That's just scientific, that's hypothesizing. But you have no evidence for it. So based on what we know today, and that's going back to the God of the Gaps argument, we are not using God of the Gaps argument. We are basing our interpretation and our conclusions based on what we do know. And the natural laws of science says it can't happen by natural means. Well, then let's conclude that it was supernatural. And there's nothing unscientific about that, but there's a basis for it. Far more than coming up with multiple spawning universes. All right. So anyway, we can conclude that there's a supernatural beginning. The creation science model is supported by the empirical data. It favors it. Now, I'm going to give you a few interesting supportive evidences, or not evidences, but supporting information that will help you. The Origin of Life Foundation is offering the Origin of Life Prize. It's $1 million for anyone who can come up with a plausible explanation. Not evidence. Not production of life in the laboratory. All you have to do is offer a plausible explanation that life can arise from lifeless molecules. That's all you have to do. Now wait, we're talking about all you have to do is give a plausible explanation. This is not a creation institute. This is a group of evolutionists who are trying to spur on and incentivize more research in the area to answer this question: how did life come about from lifeless molecules? Origin of Life Foundation. Now, Dr. Jack Szostak over at Harvard, he's been working on this for many years. In 1992 is when I first came across him. There happened to be an article in our local newspaper. I saw the headline, "Life Created in the Laboratory." So I was reading that. How many have heard of that? What did you hear? Life's been created in the laboratory?
Yeah, something about hard radiation and inorganic mud, or another version is high voltage in mud.
Okay.
Basically all involving non-organic materials and energy, and nobody's actually come up with anything.
Now, see, that's the key right there. Yeah, you're right. That's the key. They've not come up with anything. No, this article said that life has been created in the laboratory. See, that was the big deal. Of course, they did that back. They did that back before when Stanley Miller had designed an experiment simulating what was supposed at that time an experiment that simulated early Earth conditions, which is no longer considered the case. But he had run this experiment, set it in motion, and got it going. And sure enough, there were some amino acids formed and collecting in the test tube. And they said, life created in the laboratory. Molecules. Just more molecules. That's all it was. And freshman biochemistry students do that all the time. Making amino acids. It's no big deal. Well, here in 1992, I come across this headline, life created in the laboratory. So I'm reading through that. Oh, Dr. Szostak had made the statement that life had been created in his laboratory, and in about the first two sentences. The whole rest of the article was him trying to redefine what life was so it would conform to what he had in the laboratory. Now, when you get down to the end, and you had to read all the way down to the end, here's what it turned out. It even reproduces. It turns out he took some fat, mixed that with some proteins, mixed it with some other minerals, and put it together in the same in water solution, a saline solution. And what had happened was some of these molecules migrated across the membrane of the fat cells, really micelles is what they're called. And so they migrated, and so here you have evidence that molecules can migrate across the lipid membrane and enter into the cell. Well, that's a big deal. That's already been known. But they reproduce. So you get all the way down to the last paragraph. the way these cells reproduce is he was shaking it in the lab. He's shaking the jar, and the bubbles were splitting. Reproduction. Oh wow! Hey, you know, I told Colleen, look at this story. You know what's going on every evening? Anyone who's washing the dishes, you scrape off all your food. You got all the proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and fats in the water there with your soap bubbles. And those little molecules are going into the soap bubbles, and every time you put your hands in there to wash and split molecules, life! You're creating reproductive life! That's exactly what he was describing. The reason why you've not heard of Jack Szostak is because he never did create life in the laboratory. He's still working on it today. He had 7 steps that were identified necessary for molecules to progress through to go from simple molecules to a complex cell. Now it's up to 12 steps. And he says, I'm just 3 steps away. Well, he's been on 3 steps for quite a few years now. But anyway, he's still...
What happened with Frankenstein?
What's that?
Isn't that what happened with Frankenstein?
Well, now I'm not going to go there. Now, I want to tell you that Jack Szostak he'd go claim this, except his explanation and theory of how life originated is not plausible. You see, all you have to do is have a plausible. If you want to see one of the best definitions of what life is, go to Original Life Foundation, because they've got $1 million resting on this, and they spell it out. This is life, and this is what it's going to take to get this $1 million. You're going to have to produce an organism that matches up to these descriptions. And I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of descriptions of life, but this one is detailed. It's really nice. And so if you want to see that, go out to Original Life Foundation. And if you think that life can be, you got the perfect explanation for how life could arise, go get your $1 million.
What about the idea that...
No one's claimed it yet.
What do you think about the idea of creating new life out of these DNA found in amber? You know.
Oh, okay, yeah. What that is that is going to require stimulating the DNA, finding an egg, putting the DNA in there, and stimulating that egg so that it can begin to go through the process of cell division, embryonic development.
Do you think that's possible?
Oh yeah, that's possible. It can be done. Cloning was a very big breakthrough to be able to do that. Now, cloning has really hit the papers, and everyone became aware of it after I call the Dalai Lama came into being. Yeah, the Dalai the lamb is what it was. But Dolly was the reason that it became so famous was because it was the first time a mammal was cloned, placental organism like that. But in 1974, when I walked into my cell biology lab, first one in college, our professor had 2 frogs, Ronopippians, up on his desk. One was a clone of the other. They had taken a cell off the back of the one frog and cloned it into another frog. So cloning has been around for a long time, especially in plants. Cloning has been a process. But to do it to be able to clone successfully a mammal was very important. And there was some there was a lot of amazing information that came from Dolly Lamb, which also answered some questions that biologists had. One of the most important being, there is pre-programmed or programmed death, cellular death. If you clone an organism, will that organism begin at 7 years old as Dolly's mother was, or will it begin at age 0? Will it start over? Well, it turns out by 1-year-old, Dolly was already showing 7-year-old sheep disease. Now, see, that raises some very serious ethical questions for humans. You start cloning humans now, you just started them out in advanced life, and they're not enjoying life to its fullest from the beginning. And who knows what diseases they may be getting.
And that's a universal thing, that's real evident.
That, yes, exactly. And see, that was, now as far as mammals, that was an open-ended question. Is that going to happen? Prior to that happening, we already knew that in the DNA molecule there was a biological clock, a molecular clock. It ticks off a number of nucleotides every time the cell divides, and that is programmed cellular death. But was that going to start all over again and reset itself? That was a big question, and it does not. And so that was real important. Which brings up the question then, what about cloning for the purpose of harvesting organs? You probably have heard that nightmarish type proposition.
Yeah.
Well, it's really, I've never heard it actually seriously proposed as, having cloning humans for their parts. But what they are working on now, for example, if you have a heart condition, maybe heart damage, had a heart attack, and you've got some damaged tissue, that's going to fill up with scar tissue. Those muscle fibers are not going to replace themselves. Every time you have a heart attack, your heart's getting weaker and weaker, which means it's got to work harder and harder, which means your life expectancy is decreasing every time the heart pumps. Well, now they're thinking, the thinking now, and the way cloning and stem cell research and all this is coming together at crossroads is, they're thinking about taking your heart out, putting a mechanical heart or a pig heart, whatever, and basically it's rent a heart for a little while, for 6 months or whatever, while they repair your heart. And they can use that because stem cells, they can stimulate cells, and those stem cells will grow into heart fiber tissue, muscle cell, and then replace that damaged muscle area. And then once your heart is fully repaired there, they can take out the mechanical heart and put back your heart. You don't have the rejection problems. Now that is what's going on right now for current research as far as using stem cell and the advances in the learning that's been known in cloning as well. So really we're in an exciting time, but of course that within the ethical boundaries. We're not talking about cloning human beings, and we're not talking about using embryos for their stem cells, because with the finding of what is called mesenchyme tissues, and this was a remarkable finding too. In the human brain, this really was astounding. Mesenchyme tissue is stem tissue, or what they call pluripotent cells. They haven't differentiated and been committed to be a certain kind of cell. They're just residing somewhere in your body. Well, it's been that way in your bone marrow. They've been able to stimulate cells to differentiate and into various types of organ cells in your body. But I think it was at the end of 90s, maybe 98, 99, somewhere around there, there was a group, some like the University of Michigan. They found mesenchyme tissues, or these pluripotent cells in the brain. That was remarkable, because it was thought that after age 20 or so, your brain cells are pretty well committed, and it's death from that point on as far as cells, and you're slowly losing cells. They don't replace themselves. To find cells in the brain that have not differentiated but can be stimulated to grow into new neural tissue was very exciting, which opens doors for treatment of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all kinds of interesting things. But here they had found this, and as a result of that, answered an age-old question about brain and neural cells being available to regenerate themselves. But as a result of that, they found mesenchyme tissue in just about all the organs of the body now. Which means that you have all we don't need embryonic stem cell research, because we carry with us a supply of mesenchyme stem cells, so to speak, in all of our organs. All we have to do is tap in, find out where those are located, stimulate them, and now we're able to regenerate tissue as we need it.
Well, I've heard of people regenerating diseases, regenerating themselves from debilitating diseases. Somehow it must be activating those cells.
Yes, that's what it is. The key is that they are totipotent. That is, they're not totally committed, which is different. I'm sorry, pluripotent. There's not. There's terminology: totipotent, pluripotent, differentiated cells, and so on. But the point is, these have not committed themselves to be a particular type of cell. When you find those, now you can stimulate them, and they can still become a heart cell, an eye cell, a toe cell, or whatever. So it's a matter of what they come into contact with, which introduces another concept, a term that I used last night, epigenic. Somebody had asked a question about environmental influence, and that's where you get an epigenic research. Very interesting stuff. Okay. Anyway, that was interesting to talk about. The foundation, now notice this, that I put this quote up here because you see the law of biogenesis, a natural empirical law, says it can't happen by natural means. The foundation wishes to encourage the pursuit of natural process You see, it says it can't happen. The law of science says it can't happen. This is not unscientific, but this is what they are trying to get more people involved in. There's $1 million that they're offering. If you can come up with a plausible explanation, come on guys, come on, let's get on board, get your $1 million. And so that's what they're trying to do. All right, going against the law of biogenesis. But it's going to happen anyway. And this is what plays into what I was saying earlier, that when you're a naturalist, you have to have a natural explanation, force an explanation, regardless of the natural laws that say it can't happen. Okay? How did so many biochemical pathways get integrated into one coherent, unified, and sophisticated metabolic process? That's the question. They're asking that question. Here's the point. Evolutionists are stuck on naturalistic, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but here's what's wrong. Evolution is being crammed down our throats every day through the newspapers, through our publications, through our schools, being crammed down our throats as a fact. It's not there. It has serious issues that need to be questioned. And by censoring laws, censoring information, and giving one-sided arguments, no one has a chance to think clearly about the subject. That's not right. That's not education. Models that contradict laws of science are clearly unscientific, and evolution is proposing an unscientific explanation. Now, having said that, this is why there are 3 definitions of evolution. See, evolution used to be, as I quoted Theodosius Dobzhansky, he says, well, we're talking about Big Bang to mankind and everything in between. And then I give you the illustration of Kramer and said, well, it simply means change. Any kind of change, that's evolution. You see, they don't distinguish that in the textbooks. They say, oh, it just means change. And then they teach you about descent with modification, number 2. Definition number 2. What they're saying is evolution does not involve the origin of life and does not involve the origin of the universe. Do you know why they say it does not involve those 2?
Because it's not
Can't
scientific.
explain it.
That's exactly right, because the laws of science are against it, and they do not want to go into a debate or a discussion and have evolution as a term identified with this, because it's incredible. It discredits their theory. So they say it only means change within living organisms that already exist. Careful experiments, notably, this is their quotes, careful experiments, notably those of Pasteur, showed that this conclusion was due to imperfect observation, and it became an accepted doctrine, the law of biogenesis, that life never arises except from life. So far as actual evidence goes, this is still the only possible conclusion. Shucks. You see, they admit that. I had brought this up at one seminar, and I had 2 philosophy professors. They like to attend these things. And I had 2 philosophy professors sitting in the front row, and the one raised his hand and said, now, why would they make a law like that? That doesn't make sense. I said, because that's what the research shows. I mean, that was Louis Pasteur's experiment. He didn't coin the phrase law of biogenesis, but that was coined later on afterwards to describe what was observed, the law of biogenesis. And there's no reason to think it will ever be anything otherwise. Never will the doctrine of spontaneous generation recover from the mortal blow of this simple experiment, referring to Pasteur. There is now no circumstance known in which it can be affirmed that microscopic beings came into the world without germs, without parents similar to themselves. Man. Now I throw this picture up here because the idea of a simple cell, it might be simpler than 3 trillion cells, but there is no such thing as a simple cell. Every cell that functions is more complicated than any kind of infrastructure in the most complicated city in the world that you'll find anywhere. There is just no way that you're going to find a simple cell. Now, here's why the law of probability, the law of biogenesis exists. It is because it's impossible for life to organize itself, for molecules to organize themselves and form a living cell. The random chance of one recognizable formation of a protein, 1 in 100 billion chances. Now, by the way, these are probabilities calculated by mostly evolutionists. You say, now wait, why would an evolutionist calculate probabilities that show that it can't happen? This is the thinking. Wow, we shouldn't be here. It shouldn't happen. But it did. Wow. That is the thinking. It defied all the odds. Now here's the number of impossibility, mathematically calculated by Ernst Borel, a French mathematician. 10 to the 50th. We just saw one that was 10 to the 200th power. Now this is what 10 to the 50th looks like. It's 1 with 50 zeros. That's 100 billion, billion, billion. That's a huge number. When you get to that number, you're not talking about probabilities anymore. You're talking about the absolute impossibility.
Whose debt is that?
Who?
Which country's debt is that?
Yeah.
We already know the answer to that.
Now, just to try, these numbers are so big, it's hard to imagine what's going on. How many seconds are there in 15 billion years?
Ugh.
10 to the 17th. You know, you look at that number and you think, that's not enough. That number is not that big. No, that's how big that number is. You see, we don't think in exponentials. And we see numbers like 10 to the 50th and say, okay, well, that makes sense. That's manageable. No, it's not. Seconds. Tick, tick, tick. For 15 billion years, and you only have 10 to the 17 seconds. Only? No, that's how many seconds there are. Now, look at this. There's only 4 times 10 to the 11th estimated stars in the entire universe. There's a lot of stars out there.
They don't really know.
Well, they know, what they do is they grid, they map out, and they are estimating, but they know that their numbers are probably lower than what's really out there, if anything.
Well, because some haven't shown up yet.
What's that?
Some haven't shown up yet.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's why they know that it's at least this number. Now, here we have our impossible number. Here's the mass of the Earth, 10 to the 24th kilogram. Mass of the Sun, 10 to the 30th. Mass of the entire universe, 10 to the 52nd power.
Wow.
The entire universe. I'm just showing you numbers. Now, let's not talk about just atoms. Let's look at how many subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, that make up the entire universe. It's estimated that there's 10 to the 80th power. That number seems too small. No, that's how big that number is. I'm telling you, we are not able to grasp and imagine the enormity of these numbers. I have to throw this up here when I'm showing you the probabilities of calculating a cell, calculating a number. calculating the probability of life coming out into existence from lifeless molecules. It's not going to happen. That's why there is the law of biogenesis in the laboratory. The chance formation of a cytochrome C molecule with the right conditions, plus 1 billion years for it to happen, still takes 10 to the 36th power to occur. The chance that lifeless molecules can spontaneously generate into a hypothetical cell of 124 proteins.
Oh my God.
Oh, you want to memorize that number.
Right.
Actually, the funny thing is, I came across that. That was my out of my biochem book by Morowitz, and I went back and I looked at that because I knew he had talked about it, and then I saw that number. I said, "Wow, I need to put that in my slide." Morowitz had calculated based on a hypothetical cell that does not exist. He calculated based on 124 proteins in a simple theoretical cell. Doesn't exist, but that's how he said this is the simplest a cell could be. He based it on the simplest cell he could imagine possible, and it still would require, based on cells we know that exist, that number is small. We're not talking about probabilities and possibilities anymore. We're talking about the absurdly impossible. That's why the law of biogenesis is a law of science. So, the numbers are not about probability. They are about impossibility. Yeah, it's not going to happen. If natural spontaneous generation of a cell is astronomically impossible by natural means, then it must have come about supernaturally. I mean, what's illogical about that?
Nothing.
What's unscientific about that? Absolutely nothing. We have the science on our side. The empirical data. What does the evolutionist have?
Nothing.
Wishful think. Yeah, that's right, nothing.
Excuses.
Excuses. That's what they have.
Which is nothing.
That's right. The creation science model is supported by the empirical data. Evolution proposes only natural explanations, which means it's clearly unscientific. All right, here's the 7 steps. We're not going to talk about it. But the 7 steps are, in order for simple molecules to organize themselves in a living cell, they have to go through all these steps. And every one of those steps poses an incredible hurdle that is difficult to overcome. Yeah, all kinds of interesting little things here. Just showing you a little chemistry and things that have to be involved. Now here's something that occurred to me. If brilliant scientists still can't create in the laboratory, how are we supposed to think the molecules did it by themselves?
Immaculate cellular conception.
There you go. I like that one.
That's a good one.
Well, I told you, I found the articles interesting when I was reading the Smithsonian Journal that said that scientists are looking to the natural world, to birds, to design better planes, to fish, to design better subs and ships. They're looking to the design in nature to make better equipment. Isn't that interesting?
You've been doing that for quite a while.
Yeah. Former atheist. This is Dr. Anthony Flew, philosopher. October 20, 2004, he dropped a bombshell that was heard around the world. This guy was 80 years old in 2004. He's a famous, now infamous atheist. Was an atheist. But he is responsible for 2 of the most common arguments in favor of atheism. That's what he did for 50 years as a professor of philosophy. He was arguing and defending and debating in favor of atheism. And in the year 2004, he announced to the world, there must be a first cause. Now, when I saw that, I said, why? When you see someone like this change their mind, you want to go find out why. What changed his mind? What changed his mind was the original life. He said, I've been following this. I brought this up in a lecture, and some guy said, well, he's just an old man. He's getting ready to die. He's afraid of death now. I said, no. This man said that he's been struggling with this issue for 20 years. This was not a decision made overnight out of fear. He's been working on this for 20 years, and he finally came to the conclusion, no, there had to be a first cause, bring life into existence. The only explanation consistent with and supported by laws of biogenesis and probabilities is the creation science model. The life must have been created supernaturally. We have all the evidence in our side. There's our famous antagonist, Richard Dawkins. Here's what he says. Nobody knows how it happened, but somehow, without violating the law, without violating, somehow, we don't know how, but somehow, without violating, contradicting the laws that say it can't happen, it happened anyway. That's what he's saying. This may seem like a big stroke of luck. Freakish or not, this kind of luck does happen, and it only had to happen once.
Wow.
I had a guy, after a seminar I did, catch me afterwards, and we were standing out in the hall, and we were going through this issue of origin of life and these probabilities. He said, it only had to happen once. And I said, well, how do you know it happened at all? He said, we're here.
We're here.
So I turned it around on him, and I said, well, I know that God created us. He said, how do you know? We're here. So what kind of reasoning is that? I mean, he didn't see it. He used it. Isn't that exactly what he's saying?
Yep.
See, these guys don't see the absurdity of their comments because they're so convinced and so indoctrinated and so confident in their conclusion that they're right. Then he goes on and says the sort of lucky event we're looking at could be so wildly improbable that the chances of its happening somewhere in the universe could be as low as a billion in any one year. If it did happen on only one planet anywhere in the universe, the planet has to be ours because we are here.
Oh, gee.
That's not arrogant.
I'm telling you.
That is arrogant.
Here is the spokesperson of atheism and evolution in the world.
He's going to be 84 and he's going to change his mind.
Well, I'll tell you what, that will be bigger than Anthony flu.
He's struggling with it right now.
The current accepted evolutionist origin of life, that is, scenarios are untenable and solution to the problem will not be found by continuing to flagellate these. I mean, they're whipping themselves over and over and over. They're beating themselves up. I mean, these are evolutionists saying this. So far, none of the current theories have been substantiated or proven by experiment, and no consensus exists about which, if any, of these theories is correct. See, no plausible explanation. Solving the mystery may indeed take longer than the origin of life itself. So stick around long enough, folks, and they might come up with it.
They publish this stuff, huh?
Oh yeah, this is out of their own writings. That's why I have to put the quotes up here so you can see it for yourself.
You know, I don't think you need to present any evidence at all.
All I have to do is quote them.
All you have to do is just quote them,
Yeah.
and people will start scratching their head.
Yeah, yep. That's what happens. It starts putting in seeds of doubt. Okay, so we'll deal with this tomorrow. We'll go into speciation next, but you can see the nice thing about having a creation science model and having a creation science position is you have a credible explanation for how things came to be and organized, based on supported by empirical evidence. What the evolution model does, it's a naturalist explanation. It's a forced explanation. Even though the laws of science say it can't happen, it sets up boundaries, they say it had to happen anyway, they're trying to push those bounds.
Mhm.
The creation science model is more accurate and a more reliable model because as of today, it conforms to all the laws. And it can incorporate both natural as well as supernatural explanations. And that's what we want in the field of science. We want to go for accuracy. We're looking for truth, not forcing a particular presumption. The presumption of atheism or the presumption of naturalism. That is not what we're after. So tomorrow night we'll wrap up this third set of arguments, which is origin of species. Now see what we've done is we've demonstrated origin of universe, origin of life, and now if the supernatural is the best explanation for origin of universe and life, then it's logical and rational to propose a supernatural origin of species as well. See how it progresses? And that's what we're doing. We're building our case. And that's what you hear and should hear in a creationist explanation is a moving forward. That's how science advances in its hypothesizing. So we'll look at that tomorrow night, and then we'll wrap up some ideas and get you ready for debating Dr. Evolution. Yes, ma'am.
The cells that exist